The mahogany conference table stretched like a battlefield between Marcus and his stepbrother Derek, their father's will lying unopened in the center like a ticking bomb. Marcus adjusted the worn leather strap of his vintage watch, a simple timepiece that had adorned his wrist for over a decade, its face bearing scratches that told stories Derek would never understand. The lawyer's office felt suffocating, with its heavy curtains and oil paintings of long-dead judges staring down at them with disapproving eyes. Hi everyone, I'm Tina, and welcome back to our corner of the internet where real stories unfold and hearts connect. I know many of you come here seeking comfort, understanding, and maybe a little hope when life feels overwhelming. Today's story is particularly close to my heart because it's about family secrets, hidden talents, and the moment when everything changes in ways we never expect. You're going to witness a revelation so shocking that it will leave you questioning everything you think you know about success, recognition, and the quiet power of being underestimated. Stay with me until the very end because this twist will absolutely blow your mind, and if this story touches your soul like I know it will, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our growing family of storytellers. Now, let me take you into Marcus's world. Derek drummed his manicured fingers against the polished wood, his Armani suit perfectly pressed, his Italian leather shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Everything about him screamed success, from his perfectly styled hair to the diamond cufflinks that caught the light with every gesture. He had built his reputation as a real estate mogul in Manhattan, owning properties that stretched across 3 boroughs, his name emblazoned on billboards and bus stops throughout the city. Marcus, on the other hand, sat quietly in his simple navy blazer, the same one he had worn to every important family gathering for the past 5 years, his hands calloused from years of working with delicate instruments and precision tools that Derek had never bothered to understand. Their father, William Hartford, had been a complicated man who built his fortune in manufacturing before retiring to a quiet life in Connecticut. He had remarried Marcus's mother when Marcus was 12, bringing Derek into their lives like a hurricane that never quite settled. Derek was older by 3 years, more confident, more vocal about his achievements, and always ready to remind everyone in the room about his latest business conquest or expensive acquisition. Family dinners had become showcases for Derek's success stories, while Marcus quietly listened, occasionally mentioning his work in ways that Derek dismissed as hobby craftsmanship. The lawyer, a distinguished gentleman named Mr. Whitman, who had handled the Hartford family affairs for over 2 decades, cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses. The will was thick, bound in leather, and Marcus could see the careful handwriting of his stepfather on several pages where amendments had been made over the years. William had been meticulous about his affairs, keeping detailed records of every investment, every property, every decision that would affect his legacy after his passing. Derek leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world, his eyes already calculating the inheritance he expected to receive. He had spent the last month since their father's passing, making plans for the properties, discussing with his business partners how they would leverage the inheritance to expand their real estate empire. Marcus had heard him on phone calls, speaking about the old man's money as if it were already his, making promises to investors about deals that hinged on his expected windfall. Mr. Whitman began reading the preliminary sections of the will, the standard legal language that addressed debts and final expenses. Marcus found his attention drifting to the window, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk below, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own hidden dreams. He had always been more comfortable observing than participating in the spotlight, finding solace in the quiet precision of his work, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his hands rather than his voice. Derek's phone buzzed constantly throughout the reading, text messages from business associates and friends who knew about the will reading and were waiting for updates. He would glance at the messages with barely concealed excitement, occasionally typing quick responses that Marcus assumed were updates about his imminent inheritance. The contrast between them was stark. Derek, always connected, always networking, always announcing his presence to the world, while Marcus preferred the sanctuary of his workshop, where he could lose himself in the intricate dance of gears and springs that most people took for granted. When Mr. Whitman reached the section about personal belongings and sentimental items. Derek straightened in his chair, clearly expecting this portion to be brief, before they moved on to the substantial financial bequests. Marcus continued to fidget with his watch, a nervous habit that had developed over years of wearing the timepiece, his fingers automatically finding the familiar grooves and indentations that made it uniquely his. The watch had been his constant companion through late nights in his workshop, through moments of triumph and frustration, through the quiet hours when inspiration struck and he would work until dawn, perfecting a design that existed only in his mind. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly as Mr. Whitman reached the section of the will that would change everything. Derek had pulled out his phone again, likely calculating figures in his head, when the lawyer's voice cut through his mental arithmetic with words that made Marcus's blood run cold. "To my stepson Marcus, I leave my workshop, my tools, and all my personal effects, recognizing the artistic soul that I failed to nurture during my lifetime." Derek looked up from his phone with mild interest, probably wondering why the old man was wasting time on workshop equipment when there were real assets to discuss. Marcus felt the familiar weight of underestimation settling around him like a worn coat. Derek had never understood why Marcus spent his weekends in the garage, hunched over tiny mechanisms and delicate components, creating what Derek dismissively called little trinkets and gadgets. Family gatherings inevitably included Derek's commentary about Marcus needing to find a real job, something with substance and earning potential, something that would make the family proud. Derek's wife, Stephanie, would nod along approvingly, adding her own suggestions about corporate opportunities and networking events that could help Marcus get his life on track. The workshop that William was leaving to Marcus held more meaning than Derek could possibly comprehend. It was where Marcus had spent countless hours learning the intricacies of mechanical design, where he had developed his understanding of precision engineering, where he had created prototypes and concepts that existed nowhere else in the world. William had been surprisingly supportive of Marcus's interests, even though he rarely spoke about them openly, preferring to show his approval through quiet gestures like upgrading Marcus's tools or bringing home interesting mechanical pieces he had encountered in his business travels. Derek checked his watch, an ostentatious Patek Philippe that he had purchased specifically for its ability to start conversations about his success. "Can we move on to the real estate and investment portfolios?" he asked, with barely concealed impatience. "I have a conference call with my investors in an hour, and they're waiting for information about the inheritance structure." Mr. Whitman raised an eyebrow at Derek's presumption, but continued reading without comment, his professional demeanor unchanged despite the obvious discomfort in the room. Marcus remembered the first time he had shown Derek one of his creations, an intricate mechanical puzzle box that had taken him 3 months to perfect. Derek had examined it for exactly 30 seconds before handing it back with a condescending smile, commenting that it was impressive for a hobby, but suggesting that Marcus should focus his talents on something more practical, something that could generate actual income. That dismissal had stung more than Marcus had expected, not because he needed Derek's approval, but because it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of who Marcus was and what drove him to create. The lawyer continued reading through various bequests to charities and distant relatives, each allocation carefully explained and justified by William's handwritten notes. Marcus found himself thinking about the conversations he had shared with his stepfather during the last months of his life. Quiet moments when William would ask about Marcus's current projects with genuine curiosity. Those conversations had meant more to Marcus than any inheritance possibly could, representing the first time in his adult life that someone in his family had truly listened to his explanations of mechanical beauty and engineering elegance. Derek's phone rang, and he immediately answered it despite the somber setting, speaking in hushed but animated tones to someone who was clearly calling about business matters. Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation, references to property valuations and development timelines, confirmation that Derek was indeed expecting a substantial inheritance that would fund his next big venture. The disconnect between Derek's expectations and the reality that was about to unfold made Marcus feel a mixture of anticipation and dread. As Mr. Whitman approached the major financial bequests, Derek ended his call and gave the proceedings his full attention for the first time since they had arrived. His posture straightened, His expression became focused, and Marcus could practically see him mentally preparing to receive the validation he had been expecting. The real estate properties alone were worth several $1,000,000, and Derek had been counting on them to secure his position as one of Manhattan's major developers. But before you hear what happens next, I want to pause for just a moment, because this story is about to take a turn that will change everything you think you know about success and recognition. I know so many of you have felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by people who should have seen your worth. Your stories matter, your talents matter, and sometimes the universe has a way of revealing truth in the most unexpected moments. Please, take a second to hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe in the power of authentic storytelling. And leave me a comment about a time when you felt underestimated. I read every single one, and your experiences help shape the stories I choose to share. The revelation came with the precision of Marcus's finest timepiece mechanisms, each word from Mr. Whitman's mouth clicking into place like perfectly calibrated gears. To my son Derek, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my collection of business books, hoping that he will learn the difference between building wealth and building character. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner that seemed to mock Derek's stunned expression. Derek's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. $50,000? That's it? What about the properties, the investment portfolio, the business holdings? His voice rose with each question, the veneer of sophistication cracking to reveal the entitled anger underneath. Mr. Whitman continued reading with unflappable professionalism, but Marcus could see the hint of satisfaction in the lawyer's eyes as he delivered the next bombshell. The remainder of my estate, including all real estate properties, investment accounts, and business interests, totaling approximately $15 million, I leave to my stepson, Marcus Hartford, with the understanding that he possesses the wisdom and integrity to honor the legacy of hard work and authentic achievement that I tried to model throughout my life. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, and Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet as the magnitude of his stepfather's final gesture settled into his consciousness. Derek shot to his feet so quickly that his chair rolled backward and crashed into the bookshelf behind him. This is insane. Marcus doesn't know the first thing about managing real estate or business investments. He plays with watches and gadgets in a garage. You can't seriously expect him to handle $15 million worth of assets. His gestures became increasingly animated, his perfectly styled hair falling across his forehead as he paced the length of the conference room. Marcus remained seated, his hand instinctively moving to his watch again, feeling the familiar comfort of its worn surface against his fingers. The irony of Derek's reaction was not lost on him. Derek, who had spent years mocking Marcus's dedication to precision craftsmanship, was now questioning Marcus's ability to handle precision in financial matters. The watch on Marcus's wrist had kept perfect time for over a decade, never losing a second, never requiring adjustment, a testament to the same attention to detail that William had apparently recognized and valued. "There must be some mistake," Derek continued, his voice taking on a pleading quality that Marcus had never heard before. "My father and I had discussed this. He knew about my business plans, my expansion strategies. I have investors waiting, contracts pending, obligations that depend on this inheritance." Mr. Whitman shuffled through the papers with deliberate calm, clearly accustomed to handling family disputes over will readings. "I assure you, Mr. Hartford, there is no mistake," the lawyer replied. "Your father was very specific about his intentions, and he made these decisions with full mental capacity and legal counsel. In fact, he included a personal letter for each of you, which I am instructed to deliver now." He handed Derek a thin envelope and gave Marcus a much thicker packet, both sealed with the Hartford family crest that William had designed himself decades earlier. Derek tore open his letter immediately, his eyes scanning the handwritten words with increasing agitation. Marcus held his envelope unopened, somehow knowing that its contents would change his understanding of his relationship with William in ways he wasn't prepared to face in front of Derek. The weight of the packet suggested multiple pages, a lengthy explanation that William had felt compelled to write. "He says I never learned to value anything that couldn't be measured in dollars," Derek read aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. He says I treated Marcus like a failure because I couldn't see past my own definitions of success. He says, Derek's voice trailed off as he reached the most devastating parts of the letter, and for the first time in their relationship, Marcus actually felt sorry for his stepbrother. The truth was more complicated than Derek realized. Marcus had never been simply playing with watches and gadgets in the garage. Over the past 15 years, he had developed a reputation in certain exclusive circles as one of the most innovative watch designers in the world, creating custom timepieces for clients who valued artistry over brand recognition. His work was sought after by collectors who understood that true luxury came from the marriage of technical excellence and aesthetic beauty, not from mass-produced status symbols. The watch on Marcus's wrist was not just a sentimental keepsake or a quirky hobby project. It was the prototype for a revolutionary design that had caught the attention of several major Swiss manufacturers, including executives at Rolex who had been quietly negotiating with Marcus for the rights to produce a limited edition based on his innovations. The seemingly simple timepiece represented 2 years of development, countless iterations, and breakthroughs in mechanical engineering that would soon reshape the luxury watch industry. Derek had dismissed Marcus's work because he had never bothered to understand it, never asked about the technical challenges, never inquired about the client commissions, never showed interest in the recognition Marcus had earned from his peers in the horological community. To Derek, success was loud, obvious, and measurable in newspaper headlines and financial statements. Marcus's success was quiet, specialized, and appreciated by a select group of people who understood the difference between expense and value. As Derek continued to process the contents of his letter, Marcus thought about the conversation he had shared with William just 2 months before his death. William had asked to see Marcus's latest project, and Marcus had reluctantly shown him the prototype watch, explaining the innovative complications he had designed and the interest it had generated from international manufacturers. William had examined the timepiece with surprising knowledge and appreciation, asking technical questions that revealed a deeper understanding of mechanical engineering than Marcus had realized his stepfather possessed. The transformation in Derek's demeanor was almost physical to witness, like watching a carefully constructed building collapse in slow motion. His shoulders sagged as the reality of his situation penetrated the fog of his assumptions, and he sank back into his chair with the deflated posture of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. "This can't be happening," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "I had plans, commitments, people depending on this inheritance." Marcus finally opened his letter, unfolding the multiple pages of William's careful handwriting, each word chosen with the precision that had characterized everything the older man had done in life. The opening paragraph made Marcus's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "My dear Marcus, by the time you read this, you will have learned that I valued your quiet excellence far more than Derek's loud mediocrity, though I fear I never expressed this clearly enough during my lifetime." The letter continued with details that stunned Marcus with their accuracy and insight. William had been quietly investigating Marcus's work for years, reaching out to clients and industry professionals to understand the scope of his stepson's achievements. He had discovered that Marcus's custom timepieces commanded prices in the 6-figure range, that his innovative designs had been featured in prestigious horological publications, and that his reputation among serious collectors rivaled that of established Swiss masters who had been working for decades. "I learned that the watch you wear daily, the one Derek has mocked so often, is actually the prototype for a design that Rolex wants to license for their next anniversary collection," William had written. "I learned that you have been supporting yourself entirely through your craft for the past 5 years, requiring no family assistance while Derek has borrowed against his expected inheritance multiple times. I learned that you possess something Derek has never understood: the ability to create value through excellence rather than simply acquiring value through manipulation." Derek was reading his own letter again, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "He knew," Derek said suddenly, looking up at Marcus with an expression of profound confusion. "He knew everything about your work, about my debts, about the difference between what we claimed to be and what we actually were, How did he know all of this? Marcus set down the letter, his hands trembling slightly as the full implications of William's investigation became clear. His stepfather had been protecting him, gathering information not to judge but to understand, creating a legacy that would finally give Marcus the recognition he had never sought but apparently deserved. The $15 million was not just an inheritance. It was William's way of ensuring that Marcus would have the resources to pursue his craft without the financial pressures that had forced so many talented artisans to abandon their calling for more conventional careers. "The watch," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible in the heavy silence of the conference room. "You've always made fun of this watch, called it my old piece of junk, said it was embarrassing to wear something so outdated when modern technology could keep better time." He held up his wrist, letting the afternoon sunlight catch the subtle details of the timepiece that Derek had never bothered to examine closely. Derek squinted at the watch, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time in their relationship. The dial was clean and elegant, with complications that seemed to dance with mechanical poetry. But there was something else, something that made his expression change from dismissive to confused, to slowly dawning realization. Is that the Rolex logo?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose secret has finally been revealed at exactly the right moment. "Not exactly," he replied, turning his wrist to show Derek the signature on the dial, the tiny inscription that read M. Hartford Design, in lettering so small it required close examination to detect. "This is the prototype for the Rolex Tribute Collection, scheduled to launch next year. They're calling it the Hartford Complication, and they're paying me 7 figures for the licensing rights." The silence that followed was different from the earlier shocked quiet. It was the silence of a world reshaping itself around new information, of assumptions crumbling and rebuilding simultaneously. Derek stared at the watch as if it were a puzzle he had been trying to solve his entire life without realizing the pieces were right in front of him. 7 figures, he repeated numbly. "For that watch, the one I've been making fun of for years." "Mr." Whitman cleared his throat diplomatically, clearly eager to complete the will reading and escape the family drama that was unfolding in his conference room. "There are a few additional provisions," he announced, shuffling through the remaining papers. "Mr. Hartford has established a trust fund for Derek's children's education, ensuring that his grandchildren will have opportunities regardless of their father's financial situation. He has also donated $1 million to the American Watchmaking Institute in Marcus's name, supporting the training of future craftsmen in traditional horological techniques." Derek's phone buzzed with another call from his investors, but for the first time that day, he declined to answer it. The reality of his situation was becoming clearer. With each passing moment, his business empire had been built on borrowed money and expected inheritance. And without the financial foundation he had been counting on, the entire structure was likely to collapse. Meanwhile, Marcus, whom he had always pitied as the unsuccessful brother, had been quietly building a career based on skill, artistry, and genuine achievement. "I need to understand something," Derek said, his voice carrying a humility that Marcus had never heard before. "How long have you been doing this? The watch designing, the clients, the income from your work?" Marcus considered the question, thinking back to the years of late nights in William's workshop, the gradual development of his skills, the slow build of his reputation among people who appreciated craftsmanship over celebrity. The weight of Marcus's response settled over the room like dust after an earthquake, each word revealing another layer of Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of his stepbrother's life. 15 years, Marcus said simply, his fingers still absently tracing the contours of his watch. "I started with simple repairs when I was in college, learning from an old Swiss master who had a shop downtown. By the time I graduated, I was already taking on custom commissions, and I haven't needed any other source of income for the past 8 years. Derek's face went through another transformation, this time from confusion to a kind of horrified comprehension. 8 years? He repeated. You mean during all those family dinners when I was lecturing you about getting a real job, about growing up and taking responsibility, you were already earning more than most lawyers? The implications of his years of condescension were clearly dawning on him, and Marcus could see the shame beginning to replace the anger in his stepbrother's expression. Marcus nodded, remembering those uncomfortable family gatherings where Derek would hold court, regaling everyone with stories of his business triumphs while occasionally turning the conversation to Marcus's need for career guidance. I tried to explain a few times, but you always seemed so certain about what my life should look like that I stopped trying to correct your assumptions, Marcus replied. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to argue about it. The irony was particularly sharp when Marcus recalled Derek's wedding 3 years earlier, where Derek had made a toast about family success and had pointedly mentioned his hope that Marcus would someday find his direction in life. That same week, Marcus had delivered a custom timepiece to a collector in Tokyo, earning more from that single commission than Derek typically made in 6 months of real estate transactions. But Marcus had attended the wedding quietly, smiled politely during the toast, and never corrected the narrative that Derek seemed to need to maintain about their relative positions in life. Mr. Whitman was gathering his papers, clearly ready to conclude the meeting, but Derek seemed frozen in his chair, processing the complete reversal of everything he thought he knew about his family dynamics. "The Rolex deal," he said suddenly. "When did that happen? How long have you been working with them?" Marcus could see Derek's mind racing, trying to reconcile the successful watch designer with the quiet man he had been dismissing for over a decade. "They approached me 18 months ago," Marcus explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about his work. "Initially, for a consultation on some technical challenges they were facing with a new movement design. When they saw my portfolio and understood my capabilities, the conversation evolved into licensing discussions. The contract was signed last month, just before William passed away. He was actually one of the first people I told about the deal." Derek's letter was still crumpled in his hand, and he smoothed it out to read the final paragraphs again. "He writes here that you never bragged about your success, never used it to make others feel small, never demanded recognition or credit for your achievements," Derek read aloud. "He says that's the kind of man he wished he had raised me to be." The words seemed to physically pain Derek as he spoke them, and Marcus felt an unexpected wave of sympathy for his stepbrother. The truth was that Marcus had never wanted to humiliate Derek or prove him wrong. He had simply wanted to pursue his passion without interference. The recognition from Rolex, the financial success, the respect of his peers in the watchmaking community, these had all been byproducts of his dedication to craft, not goals he had actively pursued. Derek's approach to success had always been about external validation and public recognition, while Marcus had found satisfaction in the quiet perfection of mechanical beauty. "There's something else in William's letter," Marcus continued, deciding that complete honesty was the only way forward. "He mentions that he's been quietly purchasing some of my pieces over the years, commissioning custom work as gifts for business associates. The anniversary watch he gave you 2 years ago, the one you said was too simple and old-fashioned? I made that. He never told me it was for you, and you never mentioned where it came from." Derek's hand moved instinctively to his wrist, but he was wearing his expensive Patek Philippe, not the anniversary gift from his father. "I put it in a drawer," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I thought it was some vintage piece he had picked up at an estate sale. I told Stephanie it was probably worth a few $100s at most." The realization that he had dismissed a custom timepiece worth tens of thousands of dollars as worthless junk seemed to complete his understanding of how thoroughly he had misjudged everything. Before we continue with this incredible revelation, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you who are watching this story unfold. I know many of you have experienced moments when your talents were overlooked, when your hard work went unrecognized, or when people made assumptions about your worth based on surface appearances. This story is for every person who has ever been underestimated, who has chosen quiet excellence over loud self-promotion, who has stayed true to their craft even when others didn't understand its value. Your stories matter deeply to me, and I want to hear them. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and share in the comments a time when someone discovered your hidden talents or when you realized you had been wrong about someone else's abilities. Let's create a community where authentic achievement is celebrated and where we support each other's journeys toward recognition and respect. The aftermath of the will reading felt like the settling dust after a controlled demolition, with Derek sitting among the rubble of his assumptions while Marcus tried to process the unexpected weight of his inheritance and recognition. Mr. Whitman had finally escaped the emotional minefield of the conference room, leaving the two stepbrothers alone with the uncomfortable task of rebuilding their relationship on completely different foundations. Derek had spent the last 20 minutes staring at his hands, occasionally glancing at Marcus's watch with an expression of disbelief that showed no signs of fading. "I need to apologize," Derek said suddenly, his voice carrying a gravity that Marcus had never heard before. "Not just for today, not just for the way I reacted to the will, but for years of treating you like you were somehow less than, somehow failing at life, because you didn't fit my narrow definition of success." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street where people hurried past with their own hidden stories and unrecognized talents. Marcus appreciated the gesture, but he also understood that Derek's apology was motivated as much by the revelation of his own financial precariousness as by genuine remorse for past behavior. "The hardest part wasn't the lack of recognition," Marcus replied honestly. "It was the feeling that you had already decided who I was and what I was capable of, without ever asking about my actual life or interests. You created a version of me that fit your narrative, and then you treated that version as if it were the complete truth." Derek turned back from the window, his expression showing the kind of vulnerability that Marcus had never seen from his typically confident stepbrother. "The business," Derek said quietly. "My real estate empire that I've been bragging about, it's all leveraged against the inheritance I was expecting. The properties, the investments, even my apartment, everything is mortgaged or borrowed against future assets that now belong to you. I'm not just embarrassed about misjudging you, I'm financially ruined." The confession hung in the air between them, and Marcus found himself facing a situation he had never anticipated. William's inheritance was not just a recognition of Marcus's achievements, it was also, whether intentionally or not, a test of his character in the face of his stepbrother's downfall. Derek had spent years positioning himself as the successful one, the responsible one, the brother who had his life together, and now Marcus was learning that Derek's entire lifestyle had been a carefully maintained illusion built on borrowed money and future expectations. "How much do you owe?" Marcus asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Derek's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "More than the 50,000 William left me, significantly more. I was so confident about the inheritance that I started making deals based on money I didn't have yet. I've borrowed against properties that aren't mine, made commitments to investors that I can't fulfill, built a reputation that's about to collapse when people realize the foundation was never real." Marcus thought about the irony of their positions. Derek, who had always criticized Marcus for being impractical and financially irresponsible, had been living a fiscally reckless lifestyle that made Marcus's careful, methodical approach to building his craft seem conservative by comparison. Meanwhile, Marcus had been quietly accumulating real wealth through skills that Derek had dismissed as hobbies, creating lasting value through work that would continue generating income for decades to come. "There's something William wrote in my letter that I think you should know," Marcus said, pulling out the pages again and finding the relevant section. "He mentions that he had been concerned about your financial decisions for several years, that he had tried to talk to you about the risks of over-leveraging your investments, but you had always brushed off his concerns as old-fashioned thinking." Derek closed his eyes, clearly remembering conversations with his father that he had dismissed at the time. The revelation added another layer to William's decision-making process. The inheritance wasn't just a reward for Marcus's quiet excellence, it was also protection against Derek's financial recklessness. William had apparently recognized that giving Derek access to $15 million would have been like providing gasoline to someone who was already playing with fire, while giving those resources to Marcus ensured that they would be managed with the same care and precision that Marcus brought to his watchmaking. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Derek admitted, his voice cracking with the weight of his situation. "I can't meet my obligations, I can't maintain my lifestyle, and I definitely can't continue the business expansion I've been promising my investors. My reputation in real estate is going to be destroyed when this all comes out, and I have no other skills, no backup plan, no way to rebuild from where I am now." Marcus found himself in an unexpected position of power, holding not just the financial resources to potentially help Derek, but also the moral authority that came from years of being underestimated and overlooked. The question was whether Derek's current humility was genuine character growth or simply the desperation of someone who had run out of other options. The watch on Marcus's wrist continued its precise measurement of time, marking moments that would determine not just Derek's future, but the kind of man Marcus would choose to be when faced with his stepbrother's complete vulnerability. "William left me something else," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small leather journal that he had discovered among his stepfather's personal effects. "It's his thoughts about family, about success, about the difference between building something lasting and building something impressive. He writes about both of us, about his hopes and concerns, about the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind." Derek looked at the journal as if it might contain either salvation or final judgment. "What does he say about me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus opened the journal to a passage he had read several times since finding it, William's careful handwriting capturing thoughts that the older man had apparently never shared with either of his sons during his lifetime. The final revelation came not from Marcus's words, but from Derek's own recognition of the choice that lay before him, a choice that would define not just his immediate future, but the kind of person he wanted to become in the aftermath of his humiliation. Marcus read aloud from William's journal, his stepfather's words carrying the weight of paternal wisdom that both sons were only now mature enough to receive. "Derek has the intelligence and charm to build something meaningful, but he has always been more interested in appearing successful than in doing the work that creates genuine success. Marcus has always done the work, but he has never demanded the recognition. Perhaps my final gift to them both is the opportunity to learn from each other's strengths." Derek listened to the passage with the attention of someone whose entire worldview was being reconstructed in real time. When Marcus finished reading, Derek was quiet for several minutes, processing not just his father's assessment of his character, but the implications of what came next. "He's right," Derek said finally. "I built my entire identity around looking successful rather than being successful. I convinced myself that image and reality were the same thing, and now I'm learning the difference in the most painful way possible." Marcus closed the journal and set it on the conference table between them. "The question now is what we do with this knowledge," he said quietly. "William left us both something $15 million and the truth about who we really are. How we use these gifts is up to us." Derek nodded, understanding that his stepbrother held the power to either save him or let him face the consequences of his choices alone. "I can't ask you to bail me out," Derek said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his admission. "That would just be another form of the same entitled thinking that got me into this situation. If I'm going to rebuild my life, it has to be on the foundation of actual work and actual value, not family charity." Marcus felt a surge of respect for Derek's response. It was the first time he had heard his stepbrother take complete responsibility without making excuses or shifting blame. "But I can offer you something that might be more valuable than money," Marcus replied, an idea forming as he spoke. "You understand real estate, marketing, business development skills that I've never needed to develop because my work has always sold itself through word of mouth. I'm about to receive more money than I know how to manage, and I need someone I can trust to help me invest it wisely." Derek looked up with surprise, clearly not expecting an offer of partnership from the stepbrother he had spent years undermining. "You would trust me with your inheritance? After everything I've done, all the ways I've dismissed you and your work?" Marcus smiled, thinking about the precision required in watchmaking, the way that every component had to work in perfect harmony for the mechanism to function properly. "William's journal has another passage about forgiveness and redemption," Marcus said. "He writes that the strongest mechanisms are often those that have been broken and rebuilt, because the rebuilding process reveals weaknesses that were hidden in the original design. Maybe our relationship can be rebuilt on a stronger foundation now that we understand each other's actual capabilities and limitations." Derek stood up and walked around the conference table, extending his hand to Marcus with an expression of genuine humility and gratitude. "Partners?" he asked, and Marcus could hear in that single word a recognition of equality that had never existed between them before. Marcus stood and shook Derek's hand, feeling the beginning of something that had never existed in their relationship: mutual respect. Partners, Marcus agreed, but with conditions. We do this legally, professionally, with contracts and accountability. You help me manage the inheritance and business investments, and I'll provide the capital for you to rebuild your reputation through honest dealing and transparent practices. No more leveraging against assets you don't own. No more promising returns you can't guarantee. No more building success on foundations of borrowed time and borrowed money. Derek nodded emphatically. Complete transparency, honest practices, sustainable growth rather than rapid expansion. I've learned the difference between sustainable growth and unsustainable speculation the hard way. The two men stood in the conference room as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows that seemed to symbolize the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Marcus looked down at his watch one final time, but now, instead of being a source of nervous comfort, it felt like a symbol of vindication and possibility. The timepiece that Derek had mocked for years would soon bear the ROLEX name and generate enough income to fund their new partnership for decades to come. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, reaching into his briefcase and pulling out a small wrapped package. "William left instructions for me to give this to you after the will reading, regardless of how you reacted to the inheritance distribution." Derek accepted the package with trembling hands, carefully removing the wrapping to reveal a simple wooden box with the Hartford family crest carved into its lid. Inside the box, nestled in silk padding, was the anniversary watch that Derek had dismissed and forgotten the custom timepiece that Marcus had created as a gift from William to his stepson. But now Derek could see details that he had missed before: the intricate complications, the subtle engravings, the signature that marked it as an original M. Hartford design. The watch was accompanied by a small card in William's handwriting that read, "Time reveals all truths. Wear this as a reminder that value is not always obvious to the casual observer." Derek lifted the watch from the box with newfound reverence, understanding for the first time that he was holding not just a timepiece, but a work of art created by his stepbrother's hands. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly. "Not after the way I've treated you. Not after the way I dismissed your work." Marcus watched as Derek carefully fastened the watch around his wrist, noting how his stepbrother's fingers moved with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Desert isn't the point," Marcus replied. "The point is that we both have the opportunity to become better versions of ourselves. William's inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about giving us the tools to build something meaningful together, to create a legacy based on actual achievement rather than borrowed success." Derek nodded, adjusting the watch on his wrist and feeling its weight as both a reminder of his past failures and a symbol of possible redemption. As they prepared to leave the law office, Derek paused at the door and turned back to Marcus with an expression of genuine curiosity. "The other pieces you've created, the work that's made you successful, can I see them sometime? I mean, really see them, not just glance at them dismissively like I used to do?" Marcus smiled, recognizing in Derek's request the first sign of authentic interest in understanding rather than judging. "I'd like that," Marcus said. "I think William would have liked that too, seeing us finally take the time to understand each other's work, to appreciate the different kinds of value we each bring to the world." They walked out of the building together, two men whose relationship had been completely transformed by the revelation of hidden truths and the recognition of long-overlooked talents. The city street was busy with afternoon traffic, people rushing past with their own hidden stories and unrecognized abilities. Marcus and Derek stood for a moment on the sidewalk, both wearing watches that told the same time but carried completely different meanings. Derek's watch was a reminder of lessons learned and opportunities for redemption, while Marcus's watch remained what it had always been: a testament to the quiet power of excellence and the patience required to create something truly valuable. "Where do we start?" Derek asked, and Marcus could hear in his voice not just the practical question of business planning, but the deeper question of how to rebuild a relationship and redefine success on more authentic terms. Marcus looked at his watch, noting that they still had several hours of daylight left, time enough to begin the careful work of building something new and lasting. "We start with honesty," Marcus replied. "Complete transparency about our strengths, our weaknesses, our goals, and our limitations. We start by treating each other as equals and partners rather than as competitors or judge and defendant. And we start by remembering that the best mechanisms are built to last, not just to impress. Derek nodded, understanding that the real work was just beginning, but feeling for the first time in years that he was building on solid ground rather than shifting sand. As they walked down the street together, Marcus thought about his mother, who had always taught him that true elegance came from substance rather than show, and about William, who had spent his final months observing and understanding before making decisions that would reshape both of their lives. The watch on his wrist continued its precise measurement of time, marking moments that would determine not just their business success, but the kind of men they would choose to become in the shadow of unexpected revelation and the light of genuine recognition.